What we've seen in recent years is a great increase in South-South cooperation. And China is an example of one of the countries that has played a leading role in South-South cooperation, particularly around cleaner energy, cleaner transport and cleaner agriculture systems, and also adapting agriculture production so that it can take account of climate change. So I see a huge role for South-South bilateral cooperation between nations along the lines of what China has done. China has worked to reach its emissions peak before 2030. Everybody should know that this is an extremely important decision and an extremely important situation, because the emissions peak is the highest level of emissions that a country will have before its actions to reduce emissions come into force. And the fact that China's emissions peak is coming quite soon means that this represents real and an active effort to implement on the commitments for reduced carbon emissions. Now, all countries need to do this. All poor countries, all rich countries. And so the most important requirement now is that more countries follow China's example. And by following China's example, I mean making the political commitment and then putting this political commitment into action. China has not only made political commitments, but taken action to implement these commitments in order to advance the emissions peak and make sure that China becomes a world leader in implementing action to counter climate change.
China has played an extremely constructive leadership role. They've not only led by asking countries to do things, they've also led by example, by submitting an ambitious INDC, by supporting South-South cooperation on climate change, by reaching out to the vulnerable countries in the developing world to support their efforts to address climate change. So China has played an extremely constructive leadership role. The ambition level of the Paris Agreement would not have been possible were it not for China.
I think that the issue really is how fast do we act on the agreement. The agreement will be there, but then governments need to move rather decisively, first with a plan of action, with a strategy, and then, of course, with the implementation of that strategy. I'm glad that the 13th plan in China is coming just now, because this gives a framework for moving to implementation right away. I've advised other governments, make a plan, because if you don't have a plan, you can't implement.